communication studies at McGill, and they're both here to talk about those two things. We'll have we'll start off with Chris first to talk about his experience in sociology at Concordia 2 times in a row, and then we'll have Hussain talk about his experience at Concordia and McGill.
All right,
So
so
after, and then
oh,
after we're done speaking, we'll open the floor to questions. If you guys have any questions, you can just toss them in the chat, and then Chris and Hussain can answer them after. Otherwise, just raise your hand and they can take people. So go ahead, Chris. Sorry for cutting you off.
okay, no worries. So hey everyone, once again, my name is Chris. Well, Christopher Jones, but please just call me Chris. That's a lot simpler. But so I did my bachelor's in sociology at Concordia from 2016 to about 2019-ish. And so currently I'm doing my master's in sociology at Concordia again, with an interest in Canadian immigration and refugee policy. Well, currently right now, I'm just working on my thesis actually right now in terms of preparing my research methods, establishing the literature that I need to use moving forward, having regular meetings with my supervisor in order to make sure that I'm going on the right track to ensure that everything makes sense. My research question is succinct and precise in the type of research that I want to do, and basically just ensuring that everything is smooth sailing when I actually have to do my field work. And a lot of my interest in Canadian immigration and refugee policy actually stem from the fact that I currently work for the Canada Border Services Agency. So I thought, why not take the work that I already do with the CBSA and just make that my entire research in terms of decision making within the CBSA, as well as the Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, as well as the Immigration Refugee Board. So because of the connections I already established within the federal government, I thought, why not take that and just become an entire research topic? So that kind of is basically how I got to the idea of basically my entire master's career so far. And I think that basically covers everything about me in terms of my research.
All right, thank you, Chris. We'll pass the mic on to Hussain.
Yeah, so I did my honors degree in anthropology at Concordia, and then I moved on to not completely different, but a very different program in communication studies at McGill. And so in the very beginning, I wasn't even in honors in anthropology. I just started off in the regular major program. And I did not know when I first was admitted that I wanted to go to grad school, or that was an option. And kind of the more I learned about anthropology, the more kind of the writing process got interesting, and the research process especially got interesting to me. That's when I decided to kind of go into grad school. And the thing that I found very kind of interesting and very challenging was the honors aspect of and especially if you're in anthropology, even if you're not in honors, writing that big long paper for your methodology class and doing actual research like participant observation research is difficult, and it's very humbling. And that's the experience in grad school as well, where it's you get to enjoy that period where you're first accepted, and then the period that before you start classes. That's the most kind of stress-free period of grad school, and then you're thrown in. And for our program, for my program, you're mixed in with PhD students and people who are in their fourth year. So it's very daunting as a master's student. But I think that preparation of writing and kind of failing in my honors thesis, not I didn't fail the class, but I didn't do as well as I had hoped. And the research project was kind of more difficult to kind of grasp, was really good preparation. And what's an interesting contrast between me and Chris, because I'm now doing classes. So I still haven't started my thesis. And yeah, I should tell you what my thesis is about. So my interest is in oil and kind of oil as a medium. and specifically looking through it at an infrastructure angle. And that's basically what I have so far. I just wrote a paper today, like a draft for a class that is on propaganda, like corporate propaganda and oil, and like specifically in Canada, how there's like Canada Energy Citizens and these different like Facebook social media groups that are grassroots but are very like the Canada Energy Citizens are actually funded by like the lobby, the oil lobby in Canada. And so it's like looking at how that propaganda works. And so I'm just fresh off of that stress of writing that paper. And that's me.
All right, thank you, Hussein. If anyone has any questions, feel free, again, send them in the chat or raise your hand. I'll start off by asking, explain the application process for grad school and what other places you guys considered applying for or have applied for and how that was. And Chris, you can go first and then Hussein.
Oh, okay. All right, perfect. So, okay, so for the first part, for the application process itself, if I'm remembering correctly, it was having prepared basically, if I remember, it was to have like basically a letter of intent, basically outlining what type of research that you want to do. Basically have like basically have like a starter, like a little bit of a lit review done. At least have a little bit of the research set aside so you know exactly kind of at least have preliminary research. And then the final part, if I'm remembering correctly, was to set out what methods that you're going to be using within your basically for your research, whether it's going to be qualitative methods, quantitative, a mixture of both, and what type, like did you at least have a basis of ideas of what type of information gathering that you're going to do within these two different frameworks. And then basically you had to set out, basically say which professors do you believe um, best suit the type of research that you're interested in getting in doing basically. And then on top of that, you had to make sure you had some references. For Concordia, since that was the only place that I personally applied to, it was 3. So make sure to at least have, if a professor that you have a good rapport with, one who you feel will be able to attest to the work that you've done in your undergrad. And I think it was a CV as well. I can't remember exactly, but a CV was also one of the things that you needed when applying. So I might be wrong, but I believe that was one of the extra things that you needed alongside everything else that you did. So it honestly, it wasn't too difficult in decide. Well, everyone's it changes from person to person, but it wasn't, well, for me anyway, it wasn't too difficult to choose where to go in terms of, well, I might as well stay here since I knew the most amount of people and I knew relatively the type of research that all the professors had done here. So well, for me, it just felt like, oh, well, I might as well continue my master's degree here. And then it can always change if I choose to go into a PhD afterwards. But that was basically more or less how it worked for Concordia. And if I'm just going to quickly answer Pio's question, which was, is Danielle still your supervisor? Yes, actually, we're talking about Danielle Govero, who she still is my supervisor, thankfully. So honestly, I must say the dynamic between myself and my own supervisor has been really well. Has been not really well, really good, I should say. But it's been a relatively all-right process in terms of like supervisor-student relationship. So if anything, I would say that at least choosing someone who you best believe you'd work with well is very important when thinking about masters, doing a master's or a PhD, if you'll be able to like work well with them. So that basically is everything for me.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with Chris for, especially for the application, the thing that I found important, because like what I had was my experience of applying. I actually applied to McGill in 2019. I got rejected, and I applied again in hoping it was like, oh, whatever, I'm going to do it again. I put effort into my application. I applied to NYU and McGill, and the second time, obviously, I got accepted. But like my biggest weakness in the application was stating the reason why I wanted to study in this program specifically, and especially if you're switching like fields. It's like, why is your research before, or like your research interests changed, and like why this department and why this supervisor. And the more that you can get into that, the more you can actually get into details and read the stuff that they've written and kind of connect it to the research that you're interested in, the better the application will become, the more well-rounded it will become. And then having those conversations with your references also, like you gotta like at least do some preparation before and write out, like what I did was just write out the actual letter of intent and then send it to my references, and then have them read it and then give me comments back, and that was very helpful. Because like what they're gonna do is that, especially if I had Orit Halpern, who's in the department at Concordia, like read it, and she's like very versed in media studies and communication technology studies, and so she knew a lot more literature than I did on this topic, and so like she helped me a lot in kind of parsing these topics that I did not know much about, and that was very helpful. Yeah, and then why like the reason I got accepted into NYU, but the reason I didn't choose NYU is because it's very expensive. It's like 60,000 US dollars a year, and there's no funding for masters in the US, because typically you like I don't understand the US system where like most people straight go to PhD, or they get into masters and then apply to PhD in the same program, like not finish their masters. It's weird, but um, that's the reason I chose it. But like they're both great programs, and yeah, I think the biggest thing that helped me is like working with my references, and then also kind of really spending a lot of time on the letter of intent, and thinking about it and reading a lot about it too.
Thank you both. The next question, and I guess it's for both of you as well, is from Aureli, which is, could you also explain what is it to be in grad school, the pros and cons, tricks to survive? So Chris, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll I'll go into the pros and the cons for it. Well, I'll go for that part first, and I'll basically work my way back to what it is to be in grad school. So I would say well, for me anyway, one of the pros for sure was that I feel like I'm developing my like I honestly feel like I can better articulate a lot of the theory that we had learned in the undergrad, because I'll be honest, in my opinion, I don't feel like I was exactly the strongest and able to speak like, to basically speak about the different topics that we go over. So I feel like since a lot of the grad school classes require to at least be an active participant in the multiple readings that you have to do on a weekly basis, I became more comfortable in being like actually presenting and speaking, because that relates into one of the cons of like you always have to speak every week in the class. Because I remember this one time in quantitative methods, I hadn't done the reading fully because I had like another paper to do. PL definitely remembers this, but I hadn't had the time to go fully over the reading, and I couldn't properly say what the reading was about because that was the week that I had to do my presentations. And I tell you that I felt like I wanted to die in that 30 minutes that I had to do my presentation. Like I wanted to just get up and run outside the class and just say, you know what, fuck it, forget it. And on top of that, that was the class that my supervisor was teaching. So not only did I have the fact that I had to deal with that I didn't exactly do the reading, my supervisor knew that this was her class. And so I was like, well, shit, kill me now. Let me just run. So that was basically, well, that's part of like the major cons. You have to be prepared to like speak. And then I guess one of the other cons is feeling like that imposter syndrome of like feeling like, well, do I really because a lot of people, to speak to what Hussain said earlier, you are in class with PhD students as well and other master's students. You're a lot of your peers, and a lot of the time they know a lot about whether it's related directly to that week's topic or it's related to something else that they can draw connections to. So it's really, they're always super knowledgeable. So you'll always feel like, well, damn, I don't know what half these things are. So I feel like, well, I feel like I'm not on equal footing. But then that kind of is a pro because they know things that you might not necessarily know. So you're not only learning about what the course content is, but it feels like you're learning from like the pool of information that other people have that you might not have. So I feel like it's just a constant like development of knowledge that I wouldn't have otherwise had if I hadn't gone into the grad program. So for the tricks to survive, I would definitely say make sure that you're at least a couple steps ahead of the content that you actually have to go through, because honestly, I don't want anyone here to have to go through that of looking dumb in front of everybody when you didn't have the ample time to prepare. So it's like, honestly, I feel like most of the things in grad school, as long as you're prepared for it, you'll be fine. It's just really preparation will get you through most of the stuff. And I think that basically answers the first part of the question, is what is grad school? It's just like learning the processes of research, um, developing your own knowledge, creation of knowledge. I don't know. It's basically just willing to be a student of life, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how else to put it for what grad school is. So we're going to take the cheesy route on it. So, but that's basically my answer for it. So hopefully that answers it.
For me, like the what it is like to be in grad school is undergrad, like the my motivation was the deadlines, because in undergrad they're so strict and you're in huge classes where there's a lot of people and the professor doesn't care. They're like, if you don't hand it in on time, like that was my motivation. And kind of working on that, like that changes when you're in grad school, because your peers and your supervisor and these professors who kind of treat you like a peer, even though you're still a student, they treat you with more respect, and like they consider what you say seriously, as opposed to undergrad where it's like sometimes they'll do it, but it's like it depends on how big the class is, if it's a seminar class. But and so like the motivation to write a good paper wasn't just about getting a good grade, because in my experience, it's like if you try and you hand in all the work and you participate in class, like you'll get an A. Like I don't know, maybe this is just, I don't know, I've never heard of anybody in my cohort getting anything that's not an A, but I don't know. But like that was my motivation of saying something where uh, kind of I just want to write a good paper because I want to impress the people, or I don't want to embarrass myself is probably a better way to put it, in front of the people. And to do that, like my trick is now like I set up a time where I'm enjoying readings more and I'm spending more time like doing the readings, as opposed to like you have 5 classes in undergrad and you're just like reading it to like get by and then you're just like skimming it. Actually spending a lot of time with the readings, and strategically, you can't like spend all the time. Like you have to see what you're comfortable in, what you can speak to, or what you're going to use in your paper, either a final paper or like weekly responses sometimes we have. And kind of thinking about that in that way, like enjoying the readings, spending time, like setting actually a good productive environment was very helpful for me. In terms of the pros and cons, the pros is that it's really helped me to be a better writer, and like it helped me also to listen. Like I feel like I'm listening in class a lot more to my peers, who are like some like, because I don't come from the same background academically as them, and so like it's just been a learning experience of just, they have so much information on communication studies that I don't have, and kind of I'm using this time to gather this knowledge so then I could use it in my thesis and be more informed while I'm writing my thesis. And I think that's like the biggest pro. And then plus, like you develop relationships with your peers and your professors and your supervisor, I think, very good and very, uh, yeah, like it helps you learn as well. And if you want to be a TA, I haven't been a TA so far, but like I'm a kind of research assistant to my supervisor. That's also like a great way to get experience in different areas of research. And in terms of the cons, uh, it's kind of like you have to be committed if you're going to do a master's to do a PhD in social sciences, I think, or any humanities. Technically, communication studies is humanities, but kind of you have to be committed to get a PhD or know a path that you want to go through that a master's can actually help you, because a master's is just a 2-year program. And if you're not 100% sure about a PhD, it could be a useful thing for you to learn. Because like when you're writing a thesis, it's a smaller project. It's usually like more of a literature review, or there's less kind of a primary research that you have to be doing, and so it could potentially give you insight into what a PhD would look like, and then kind of go from there. But you have to be kind of more or less know what you want to do after the master's. If you have a job lined up, or you have a specific career in mind that it could wait for 2 years after a master's, then I think that's a good thing. But like, yeah, that's the haziness of what to do after a master's. For me is kind of like the struggle of like, where it's like PhDs is a little more clear. I don't know. But yeah.
All right, thank you both for answering that. The next question is from Phoebe, which is, how do you go about asking a professor for a reference letter, especially if you will only be applying to grad school a few years after taking their class? And either one of you can respond.
Actually, sure, I can actually answer that. Okay, so actually, funnily enough, I had, honestly, for what I did, if I knew a professor that would probably write me a really good reference letter, but I hadn't taken their classes in ages, was that, well, actually, I had a professor in CEGEP that I had taken that I'm still regularly corresponding with. So I would say that I just honestly shot them an email and was like, well, hi, so-and-so, I'm applying to grad school. Would you be willing to be my reference for this reason, X, Y, and Z? I would think that would probably work as well, is if you weren't in regular like communication. As long as like you are really nice about it and polite, and just ask like, hey, I'm doing this, would you be all right, or would you be comfortable with being my reference? I would think that if the professor is like, whatever, if they're whatever about it, or if they're just they like you enough, they'll just most likely say yes, because there's no real downside to them saying yeah. As long as you give them enough time to actually do the reference, in most cases they won't tell you no. So really, I would say just shoot them an email, or if you see them regularly, if you're still in classes, and then you just haven't taken their specific course in a significant period of time, you can either meet them in person, or you can just ask them via email if they would be cool with being a reference. So I've personally, for me, I don't think there's any real reason to stress too much about asking, because they'll probably say yes anyway. So that's my little piece of advice for it, honestly.
I have to say that's pretty good advice. And I'll echo what Chris says. And the thing that I found helpful is going and having a meeting with them and actually talk. Like if you haven't seen them in a long time, and like when I asked like both my references, like I hadn't taken an actual seminar class, or like a class where they would know me. Like they didn't even grade my stuff because it was like a bigger 200 level class. And then like for a reach, you asked just like, can you send the paper that you wrote for that class? And then I just sent it. And then we had discussions, like multiple kind of meetings during her office hours, where we talked about like, okay, why are you interested in grad school, and had those conversations. And like it could be very intimidating. Like I was very intimidated of like what do I have to say? Like I don't know, like I'm not that well read, and like I only read things for classes. But kind of having that conversation helps them also write your reference letter, because they know you more, and then they feel more comfortable kind of writing it. Because I don't know, like that's the thing that is kind of unclear to me still, of like, if they don't know you, what does that letter look like? Like, does it look more generic? Does it look, I genuinely don't know, like, because mostly like they accept unless they don't have time. But definitely like having a conversation with them is very helpful, and helpful for both of you. Like helps you know, like, okay, what do you want to actually go do? And them asking you kind of like hard questions of like, okay, why do you want to do this topic? Like, why not like a topic like this? And yeah, it's helpful all around, I think.
I thank you both for answering that. The next question is from Chloe. It's, what type of jobs, in your opinion, does a BA in Soci/Anth enable you to do in the workforce today? And Chris or Hussain, either one of you can.
Hussain, I'll let you answer first, since I answered first most of the time before. So please.
I think Chris, you have the better answer because you got a job
Okay, fine. I'll go
related
first for it.
to. Yeah.
Okay. So, well, actually, so, all right. So, what type of job? Okay. So that'll depend on, of course, please use it in how it best applies to your personal situation. But okay, so for my own work that I do at the CVSA, it really, like, okay, how do I best apply what I learned in my BA? Okay, so I'm going to speak on the larger scale federal government stuff that I know that specifically ask for like more sociology/anthropology degrees for. Okay, so I'll go in and then I'll talk about the specifics of my own personal position. So for example, if you're in either sociology or anthropology, a lot of the work that, for example, Stats Canada asks for is a lot of the more quantitative methods that you're more accustomed to in, I can't remember the courses, but basically a lot of the quantitative research and analysis that you would be comfortable with in doing in sociology, for example, is a lot of the requirements that Stats Canada asks for when they're making their job callouts through, whether it's like through external means or internal means. But for my own job personally, a lot of what I have to do at the CVSA is really a lot of, like, I hadn't had to actively use specific, like, extra specific things in terms of my sociology degree, but it was more of, well, I've had to do work, whether it's related to Indigenous reconciliation between the federal government and Indigenous communities, or whether it's related to how to implement different um, processes or policy when it comes to how the CVSA will conduct itself within, whether it's be through port of entry decisions, how CVSA agents might do their own jobs in terms of application, in terms of processing, or it would have been related to work that I've had to do when it comes to refugee files that had to be done. So really, I would say a lot of the federal government jobs that I've had to do, I find a lot of the skills that you can develop in sociology and anthropology does align with a lot of the work that a lot of federal government jobs require you to have and that you actively developed. So I don't know how to, my apologies if I can't call on specific knowledge that they require for, but I find that there's a lot of opportunities that you develop. There's a lot of opportunities that basically need the knowledge that you develop if in sociology or anthropology that will always be in demand for public service. If hopefully that kind of makes sense in the larger scheme of things, but in my opinion, a lot of public service does require the a lot of things that you do learn, public service will always have a demand for it. Hopefully that kind of encapsulates what I'm trying to say, but that's basically what I think. That's basically what I think best answers your question, honestly.
I have like my perspective is different because I'm an international student, so none of the federal jobs like I can't really apply. You have to get permanent residence or be a citizen. And like I don't know as much about the job aspect of it, but like the thing that has helped me get jobs, like part-time jobs or like jobs that are good for experience, the thing that most helped me is my ability to write, which a lot of people outside of humanities and social sciences don't actually know, or like they're less skilled at. And so this is kind of like an important skill when you know how to write a cover letter or know how to write a report for your job, if it's an office job. Like that is one of those skills that is very underrated and like underthought. And especially like your ability to put things like ideas into a good format while writing is another thing where if you're writing a report, you don't want to be stressed about it. Like you want to do it in one day or like, you know, the few hours that you have at work. And I think a lot of anthropology and sociology teaches you to be efficient and kind of makes explicit the form of writing and like why you write in this way and things like that are helpful in terms of writing. But I think like unfortunately my like the way I view it is that like you have to do a lot outside of anthropology and sociology to kind of uh, to have a traditional career. Like I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about this, but this is like the kind of experience that I've had of like the things outside of the job things, the like related outside of school has been the most helpful in terms of employment and not the actual degree, but the skills definitely are transferable in my opinion.
Thank you both for answering that. I don't see there's any more questions in the chat. But again, if anyone has questions, just send
I
them in the
think
chat.
I think there was about how big classes are in grad school
Oh,
by
yes.
Roxanne.
And
Yeah.
I just want to also, before we move on to any other questions, Pierre-Olivier wrote in the chat concerning the question about the reference letters, that if you do send a question about getting a reference letter from a teacher who was teaching a bigger class with TAs, even if the professor does not personally know you, they will email your TAs and ask them about you as a student. So I guess in that case, those teachers could still be a potential course of action for those of you who are
Yeah.
asking about the reference letters.
Yeah. So it's not too it's like as long as you ask is it's like it should be good. You'll be fine in 95% of the case. Should I go into answering the classes? Okay, so for most of the classes that I had to take, it was usually capped out at 15 people in a course. I can't remember if it's like it certainly wasn't like higher than 15, because most of the time it was probably less in my experience, because it's like a lot of the courses is a lot of the discussion heavy. So it was like it was really basically just like it would be harder to have like a lot of discussion oriented classes and ensuring that everybody has a chance to at least present the reading for that week if you're more than that. But yeah, in my experience, it was mostly at the most it'd be 15, at the worst it maybe be like one or two extra people, so about 16, 17 people, but in most cases it's usually less than that.
Yep, similar experience for me. Um, like my biggest class was actually like kind of weird. Like I've had last semester, like my first semester, I had a class like weird. This is the trippiest thing. I had a class with Brown, like students from Brown, the ethnomusicology. They're all like PhD students, and it was 30 people. And I did not say one like there's no participation grade because it's like 30 people and it's a seminar class. Like the participation was like writing things, but like that was the most intimidating experience. Like to start off grad school with like these people who were like talking about music and like we're like trained musicians and like I don't know anything about it. And yeah, like classes are usually small, and that's like helpful, but also at the same time intimidating. And then I'm not sure like I'm having a reading course, like a directed reading course with my supervisor and one other student. So that's like a class that's 3 credits that I'm going to get, and it's only like 3 people, 2 students and then one professor, and it's like reading like this huge 900-page book and then just writing like a 2-page paper about it. And like that's a potential. I don't know. I'm not sure like if different programs how they do directed reading, but that's also an interesting thing, and it's very useful to kind of have a class that is explicitly about your research, because that's like what the directed reading should be about, and kind of spending a lot of time on material and kind of discussing it with another student or with your professor or supervisor is very, very helpful too.
All right, thank you. Well, so speaking of classes, what's the most interesting classes you've taken so far in your master's degree, and what's the most interesting thing you've learned?
Would you like me to go first on that one, Hussain, or?
Sure.
Okay, so the most interesting class, the most interesting class that I had taken was this one course on utopia. And it was basically, it was, okay, honestly, I can't remember exactly how to explain the course, but it was basically a course on basically discussing the theory, like the theory of utopias, and basically how do we come to understand utopias, and basically what would the construction of a utopia be. And it was basically this entire discussion on like, well, shoot, what's your utopia specifically, and how do you come to that type of utopia, and basically understanding that entire construction of it. Basically it's like, I would explain it a lot better, but you know what, I'm not going to. It was taught for that course specifically. It was by Beverly Best, and honestly, that was it was really interesting. It was really interesting class, because it was one of those classes where it's like, because I've never really experienced a class where it was like, yo, what do you like, and why do you like it, and how would you get to what you want the world to look like, and why would this be like, why would you have it like this, and how would a utopia work when different people have different ideas of what creates a utopia. So honestly, I think that's what I kind of learned. But in that class of like, well, shit, what do I actually want, And it was kind of just, it was one of those classes where it's like, you think you don't learn anything, but you kind of do, because you're just spending a class reading a theory and then just talking about it for like an hour and a half. And it was, you know what? I feel like it was more fun than I did learn something. If that sounds really bad, but honestly, that's what I got from the class, because that was the only class I got to talk about Black Panther for an hour. So yeah, it was honestly, it was, yes, I am a student of life. So you know what? I appreciate that course because I could be a student of life for that hour and a half. So yes, that was why that was the best class that I've had, honestly.
For me, it's kind of like I'm learning all the time. So, but the most interesting is the one with like the ethnomusicologist students. It was on instruments and instrumentality, and the readings ranged from like, about like music instruments to more to kind of broader readings about like technical aspects of music, or like sound compression. And reading about that, like the main question of the class was like, what is an instrument? And all the readings like that kind of covered this topic in a variety of ways. And what was really interesting and helpful about that class is that it wasn't focused on doing original research as the final paper. It was you write like smaller papers on artifacts. So I did, like, my paper was on a mattress, like as an instrument, and kind of like, attacking it from different angles. And each week you had to copy the style of one reading that you had. And so it was like a writing workshop. And I found that very interesting and unique, because I've never had like a writing workshop in that way. And so like what we would discuss after like the theory stuff is like, okay, what are the ways you actually write? Like, what did the author do in this paper? And when you make that explicit, it's so helpful. Like, it helps me read papers now a lot better, like to actually like say, okay, what is the author trying to say and how are they saying it? And once you kind of expose the structure underneath, it it becomes so much easier to understand and kind of skim through it. Even like you're saying, oh, this part's not that important actually, like, or I already understand this part. And that was like the most helpful thing that I learned, is just, you know, spending time actually writing and then thinking about writing and how to read even.
All right. Those were interesting answers.
Oh, and I got another question from Sam, by the way. If
Go
it
ahead.
was Sam's question was, in doing your thesis, what's the most challenging aspect or an underrated aspect in writing it so far? I don't think Hussain will really be able to give an answer for it. But so basically in my experience so far, I think a lot of the problems that I've been having is because it's COVID. So it's like that's already been like a massive toll on motivation and everything. So I think, so basically I'll start by saying that that was one of the bigger challenges that I had to face when writing my thesis so far, because a lot of the plans that I initially wanted to do tied to being able to after work, going to school, like putting a 2-hour block to get through all my reading so that I can at least have like at least a halfway decent schedule of like, okay, I can start research at this time period, and then by this time I'll be able to at least have everything collected so that I can do my data analysis and basically begin writing the thesis. Of course, COVID was like, no, fuck that, fuck you, and fuck everything that you had wanted to do. So that went down the toilet. So now really the challenge for me has been getting through like the large chunk of books, like getting through the large chunk of books that I have on my desk, which I'll be honest, I've been procrastinating like crazy. So really it's either been a mix of motivation, procrastination, and I need another shin, but I can't think of it right now. But it was basically just trying to at least either getting it through, half feeling like I'm a disappointment to my supervisor because the amount of times I scheduled a meeting, I was like, oh, sorry, I haven't sent you anything this week. Can we do it next week? And it's just basically been trying to at least be professional in that it's like, look, I'm sorry, could you at least like, which she's been thankfully very empathetic to the entire process because we're in unique circumstances, but she's been very understanding. So that part is fine. So I would say that's really the challenge, is making sure that and then it's also the fact that you can't beat yourself up too much, because that's a lot of what I'm doing. It's like, oh, well, I'm just lazy and all that. And it's like, so it's just trying to make sure you don't beat yourself up too much if you're not meeting the deadlines that you want to make, because life happens. I mean, life happens. So, I mean, it's going to be rough a lot of the time. So really, it's just been trying to find the time to really buckle down and get through it. So really, that's been my challenge lately, of making sure I'm sticking to it alongside my responsibilities with work or family, etc. So yeah, that's basically the challenges and that I've been going, the trials and tribulations of Jones, really. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that insight, Chris. We already kind of got an idea of this, but what is the workload in grad school in terms of readings, and how many hours do you put in outside of class time for workload? And so yeah, what does the length of assignments look like? And like, obviously the reading, I think one of you said how you had to read a 900-page book for a class. So what is that like? And how many hours in a week do you find yourself working on grad school stuff?
I'll let Hussain answer for the classes part, because it's been a while since I've had to take courses. But for a lot of in terms of like class preparation, it was a lot for me because I did full course load for both the fall and winter semesters, so that I can at least get all my classes done within like the year, so that I can just basically use the rest of the time to work on my thesis. But I would say if I I'm not the best in terms of hourly breakdown for how much time I have to spend uh, in terms of like homework, but I would say that the best way that I can put it is that I would say most of the time that I would spend outside of class was preparing for the next class that I have to do. So let's say, for example, I had maybe a good 2 hours between classes. I'd use about an hour and a half between classes to at least prepare for the next class that I have to take that day. Or I would spend maybe a good 3, 4 hours after class so that I could start readings or, well, that were, of course, for like the next week. And basically, it really fluctuate between 3 to 5 hours that I would spend every day in terms of doing work. And I'll try to like reduce my course load over the weekends to maybe an hour to 2 hours, because I mean, I know I'm not going to be as heavily focused on weekends. So really, I would say on a weekly basis, probably like 8 hours is what I would probably do in a week for homework. Maybe that's a little low for other people in my cohort, but for me, that's what really got me through like the 2 semesters of full course load classes that really helped me, and I did relatively well. So that worked out for me, and honestly, Hussein, did you have
Like we
something similar
have
for that?
very different experiences, because I like today I spent 8 hours writing like and editing the paper, which is like it's just different. Like for me, like it isn't like I need to spend that much time, but I feel like the pressure of like I'm not understanding the material like other people because of the background. Like I need to kind of investigate the stuff a little more and do my own research of like what is this concept that I don't understand that everybody knows, and kind of yeah. But I definitely like for the workload, I spend more than 40 hours a week like doing readings and writing, especially when there's writing. Like when there's reading, it's a little less kind of time consuming. But like for this week, like I have a presentation and this draft that I had to submit, and I spent all weekend working on it, and that was spent like 28 hours working on this paper, and it's only a draft, but definitely like I realized early on to the first semester, it's like I couldn't keep up the same work ethic and the same schedule that I had for undergrad, even though I was taking, less classes technically. Um, and like everybody in my cohort feels this way. And so this might be like a program specific thing. But yeah, like it's overwhelming. And if you're a TA, like I'm happy that like I get more free time. Like my job is more flexible. But like if you're a TA, because the ramp up, I would assume is the same. Like when you're doing a lot of grading, it's when you have, it's at the end of the semester when you have your final papers due. So that's also kind of like an added stress, and like you have to work outside of, you don't have a set schedule, except for the classes. But like in a weird way, like the most relaxing part of the week in terms of work, like for school, is the class itself, because like you get to enjoy and discuss and like hear other people's thoughts, and but like throughout the week it's like I'm just stressed out, like just doing these readings and then writing the papers. But it just might be my own individual experience, and like cohorts stuff.
Honestly, if I can add, I feel like that's really the difference between how I was in the undergrad versus now, because I did a lot more. Well, now I find I'm breaking down the work more than I did in undergrad, because, well, for me personally, I felt like, well, you know what, I can probably spend at least a weekend doing this and I'll probably be fine for it, probably be fine for whatever test or like for whatever exam. I'll probably be fine in a weekend. Whereas now, well, since there's no real exams and a lot of your grading comes from either participation or through papers that you have to write, I personally started shifting into just, well, I'll just probably instead of doing everything in a single weekend, because there's so much work in terms of like the amount of readings and the length of readings that you have to do on a weekly basis, that it became easier for me anyway. And then working part-time on top of that, it became easier to just compartmentalize, well, look, there's only so much that I can do in a day. Let me do this much for this day. Let me do this much every day. And it became second habit of just work in smaller chunks, because I find it easier to burn out in grad school than it is in undergrad, honestly, because it's like the amount of times that I've forgotten personal responsibility that I've either had with friends or with other professional responsibilities because I didn't properly prepare for this grad school class. It just became second nature to just properly just like make sure you have everything at least done in a way that you aren't completely stressed out by the end of the week, which is why I'm fully for like at least taking a weekend or two off sometimes. I mean, not to be crazy about it, but I mean, sometimes taking a day off is more useful than we would like to admit in terms of like productivity. Because I mean, because honestly, I feel like that's been my entire mantra of, well, look, there's only so much that I can do in a day. I can either just chill out about it, or I can be in a classroom wanting to run out of class because I didn't prepare properly for it. So, I mean, there's only so much I can do. So I might as well just be chill about it. So that's the approach that I've been taking. And last thing, I just started the pro for grad school was actually like the cohort stuff and like hang out with like other people, because most of the time everybody's taking the same classes at the same time. So a lot of the fun of grad school is being able to be like, well, you know, this class really sucks and here's why. And then everybody will automatically agree with you because they have to go through the same experience. So that was just the mini thing I want to add.
My favorite thing is when somebody sends you like a DM of like, what the fuck are they talking about? And it's just like, it makes you feel less alone of like, I didn't understand this theory and other like somebody else in my class doesn't understand. So that's good. And like, yeah, I think like the best thing about it is like talking to your cohort, because like a lot of people feel the same way. Like I found it, like I didn't feel like if I'm not understanding something, it wasn't like everybody in my cohort didn't understand it, but like we talked about it, and then we're like, yeah, I don't really necessarily get it. And like understanding that sometimes it's just literally like you skim the readings, you do as much as you can, and then you kind of like you have this front of like, yeah, I understand what I'm saying, and then inside you're like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Like that's also like a thing that a lot of students do, I think. And also ask your professor or supervisor for like reading tips, because like people, like the thing I found out is like people don't just read the entire book, like they skim, or like, you know, they have strategies of dissecting a book in 8 hours or like one day. And for me, I foolishly thought, it's like, oh, I have to sit down and read this book page to page, until like somebody told me like, no, you don't have to really do that. And kind of like, it was easier to digest these bigger readings, because most grad schools like will get like, the most I've gone is like a book and then an additional 100-page reading. So it's like 400 pages, but they don't expect you to read all of it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you guys weren't doing your degrees, what would you be doing? If you guys weren't doing your master's degrees, what do you think you'd be doing with your lives? Or
Oh, okay. So if I wasn't doing, okay, so I'd probably still be working for the government, honestly, except I'll just have more hours. I'm not gonna lie. It's like, I guess if I wasn't doing my master's, I'd be a full-time employee sooner for like the CVSA, if anything. So really, it's like, I can't say there's that much difference in terms of what I would be doing if I hadn't done it. It's just a matter of like the cost analysis of, well, how much less am I making how much more would I be making if I hadn't done it? So it's really, it was really just like, do I want to be a full-time employee for the CBSA now, or am I willing to hold off on it for a little later? Because I mean, there's a lot of flexibility to my job. So it really isn't like deciding factor in terms of like, if I hadn't done it, would I have gotten the job? So that's what I can say for me anyway.
You want to answer Chloe's question, since you?
Oh, should I? Oh, yeah. Okay, I can answer that in one fell swoop.
Yeah.
So basically, how I got into the government was they were doing this. Well, there's this student program that they call like the Federal Student Worker employment program, or FSWEP or something like that, where you can basically just make make a profile, and you're able to like apply to a handful of the um, jobs that are available to students um, within the government. And basically, I applied in about the beginning of 2018, I believe it was. So I've been working here for close to 3 years now. So basically I applied through like the student program that they had going on, had to do fingerprinting, the entire process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's basically how I got into my current job, which I actually first started doing I had to go through refugee files and basically implementing them into the government system that they have, that both CBSA office employees, um, the basically the program that government CBSA agents use, whether it's at like the airport or through like different borders that they basically always look at. So that's basically what I had to do until I got a side promotion to work under the director of my current position for the corporate services division. So that's basically how I got into it.
And a question in the chat: are you getting a pay raise after you finish your MA?
I mean, I'd hope so. Not gonna lie. I mean, I'd hope, but I mean that it depends on what like position that I can grab when I get out. But thankfully now I get like a pay raise every so often because of like my group category, because of like how long I've been working as a student within the government versus like, okay, well, there's like 6 or 7 brackets within the MA program if you're a MA student that you get a pay increase. So I don't think after my program, after I'm done at my MA and get hired, hopefully I'll get paid more than what I'm doing now.
And you'll be unionized probably as well.
Yeah, I'll be unionized. I'll probably get greater pay, and there's more benefits that I would get that I don't have now. And so it's like, hopefully that works out for the best. But for now, I can't really get a full-time job because of my student status. So although I should be getting a job because I worked there for 3 years, but that's shit. But you know what? That's basically how it goes down for it. And yeah, that's basically the whole government stuff. Hussain, got anything to share?
What I would be doing if I'm not doing my master's? My answer is less practical than yours. I have the practical answer, which is I used to work in like university admin at Concordia. And so I would just like apply to different university admin positions because like the skills, once you learn, like it's kind of like a weird learning ramp of like the way admin works in universities, where you have to know certain skills, and but then once you know them, it's like you're good, like you can get jobs. But like the difficulty about admin jobs and applying to any unionized job is that you'll see a lot of listings on like university websites for jobs, but some like they have to legally put the job posting, but they have a system of in the union, like for most unions, where if you're in the union, they prefer the candidate, like you get priority over everybody else. And so they just list the thing, and you never get a response because they're just they have an internal transfer that they have to do this procedure legally. And so like that's probably what I would be doing, and kind of like applying, and hopefully I'd probably move out of Montreal and go to Toronto or something. The kind of unrealistic or less practical, like I would want to go to film school, and like so like I would develop a portfolio, which I might do after my master's. I don't know what's going to happen after, but that would be what I would be doing.
Will you be linking your mixtape in chat?
Just subscribe to my SoundCloud. I actually do have a SoundCloud, but it's not like but I don't advertise it. It's just the thing that I put some things on. It's not, I'm not a professional musician, but I'm not gonna
call you Little Microphone.
Oh man. But yeah, you should get into SoundCloud. You should get a pro subscription.
This kind of transitions into my next question. If you're not working on your master's/thesis, what are you doing in the free time that you do have? I guess Hussain, you can go first since you kind of alluded to that.
Yeah, like I don't know, like it feels what I'm doing is just generally with a pandemic, it's like kind of weird. So it's like, doing Zoom calls with friends. And really like I stopped thinking about academic stuff. As in like just a few years ago, like before I got into my master's program, I'd like want to impress my friends with all like this knowledge about anthropology. And now it's like I don't want to talk about that stuff because it's like I've spent most of my week thinking about it. And plus it's like the best thing about grad school is that it's a humbling experience. Like you learn that you're not actually that smart or like as smart as you think you are. And like there's a slight benefit to imposter syndrome. And so yeah, just generally like trying to fill the time, and trying to incorporate as much like video editing stuff into my classes that I can, is something that I've found helpful because I just want to work on it anyway outside of class. Yeah, that's generally what I do.
So as for myself, it's been really grasping with the fact that I'm an anime nerd. So, well, basically just being a weeb really has been part of like my offline. Well, when I'm not stressing about like my thesis writing, I'll do something either related to like video game streaming with Hussain actually, watching anime every so often. Um, Honestly, it's like I would like to say that I read more for my thesis stuff, but I really don't. It's like that's part of where the procrastination comes in of like, yeah, I'll probably just be watching Netflix for a good hour and just pretend it's like, yeah, I've had a real productive day when I worked for 5 minutes. So it's like, yeah, that's basically it's either just watching something on Netflix, watching an anime that I really like, or just playing a game every so often. So that's really just me being a geek on my off time.
You know what's funny is that doing Twitch streams with you actually helped me in class because we're talking about Twitch. Like we had a whole class about like live streaming, and in like my emerging media class, and we talked about it, and it was actually very helpful to kind of have this anecdotal experience of like what it is like to stream. And like people had questions of like what motivates small streamers because like we talk about like the PewDiePies or whatever, like all these famous people who just make money, but like we stream to our friends and like two other people that show up. So it's like what motivates people like us is an interesting question, and also like knowing a little bit like of the partnership program, like how that works and how labor works, I guess, in Twitch is also interesting. So doing stuff outside of class or work helps you sometimes in the thing that you're doing. So
I would
So
imagine.
do you, sorry?
I just said I would imagine. We'll take one more question, which is Chloe's, which is who are your mentors and who do you look up to?
Sam, do you want to drop your mentor?
my mentor, I don't know. I wouldn't say like I've had a traditional like mentorship or like like the way that people describe somebody took me under their wings. I think Orit is definitely like a person that has influenced me. And my current supervisor, Darren Barney, he's very old. Like he's also like somebody who I find to be like that I look up to in terms of like the work that he does, and also the way that he carries himself as an academic. He's like genuinely a nice guy and understanding, which like sometimes you're intimidated by professors, and like he kind of like drops that. Like there's no kind of barrier, there's no pretension that he's like he knows better than you or any of that. And I think that's like something that I find admirable in like an expert and somebody who knows their shit. So
If I had, honestly, if I had to say, like, in terms of mentor slash people I really looked up to, I don't know, because I mostly have my mom to be my mentor slash person I looked up to the most in terms of, because I would say I get all my better traits from my own mom in terms of, well, we're constantly talking about something and her taking interest in what I'm learning and willingness to listen to the ideas that I have, being relatively interested in my political stances and trying to understand the different aspects in which I'm more knowledgeable in terms of politics than I am than her. And she actually listening and uh, like actually being influenced and understanding and even repeating some of my own talking points that I've had in terms of my own political positions. So really, I think I don't really have much outside of that. Outside of that, meaning like I don't really have any other people that I really look up to other than my own mom, who is like a couple feet away from me in the other room. So that's really where I get most of my own, like, because she acts like as a means for me to even talk about my thesis in terms of like the direction that I want to take my research, and is mostly where I get most of my ideas from, how to better articulate the ideas that I want to get across. So really that's honestly, yeah, that's who I looked up to and who I believe is my strongest mentor that I have right now. So yeah.
I also have another mentor, Chris.
Oh,
You know,
oh, you know what? You're
inspiration.
right. Actually, Hussain. Actually, I forgot to say, Hussain was my biggest inspiration and mentor. The amount of things he's taught me in life, it was like how to improve my sarcasm, how to be built like an asparagus, how to. Oh, it's wonderful.
It is one. I don't know. You haven't taught me much, but you know, I look up to you.
Well, you've taught me a lot, and I look up to you.
All right, well, thank you both for being here. Thank you everyone for coming. We're just gonna wrap it up since it is it's 8:18 right now. Chris and Hussain, if you guys want, you can maybe drop your emails in the chat if anyone wants to reach out to either of you. Like your school email, your university emails, or whatever best way of reaching you is. Thank you everyone again for coming. Roxanne, do you have confirmation on when the next event is? Because it did get postponed.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that it was officially set up again for Thursday, this upcoming Thursday.
Okay, perfect.
So yeah, if anybody's interested in coming to the next one, it's going to be in a couple days.
All right, that's exciting. Well, thank you everyone again for being here. Thank you, Chris and Hussain, for
Get
this
claps on the chat
fruitful,
or the
very fruitful chat.
Thank you for having us, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
This was very fun.
Yeah, thank you for giving us some of your time and your insight. I'm sure a lot of people have appreciated it. So
Yes, for sure, for sure. And yeah.
All right, yeah, Roxanne, you can stop recording now.
Yep.
I think that's good. Unless any Chris or Hussain have anything to say.
Yeah, it would be better if it's not recorded.
Yeah.